Hello and welcome to The Other Way. If you are listening or watching on YouTube or Spotify via video, I hope you feel like you're in the room. I'm so excited to be back here for our 2025 winter and spring season. We have quite an incredible lineup of guests, and I can't wait to introduce my next guest. But before I do that, I just want to take a moment to really pause and appreciate this community. I've been doing some reflecting and curation for this next season, and I realized that we are almost at 3 years of recording, over 100 episodes, and I'm just so grateful for every single one of you that has been joining me on this journey. Some of you are here from the very beginning in 2021. I had just left my decade-long career in tech to pursue traditional Chinese medicine, and the podcast has so incredibly evolved since then. It's just so amazing to witness in terms of the topics, expanding beyond just Chinese medicine and health to spirituality, to work, life, really exploring those paths less traveled and sharing the beautiful stories of inspiring humans, researchers, founders, spiritual teachers, and more. And I'm just so grateful. I really launched this podcast as an outlet to explore my curiosity, and every single episode is truly filled with so much love. But it wouldn't be as rewarding if you weren't on the other side listening. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And to celebrate this transition into the new year and this milestone of just continuing building this community and sharing these stories, we are organizing a giveaway. It's a $100 giveaway for podcast listeners. And in order to enter this giveaway, all you have to do is subscribe and leave a review. Every single review is so helpful for propelling the podcast growth. About 60% of people subscribe versus the 40% that tune in regularly. And so if you could hit the subscribe button, whether it be YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and just leave us a review. It would mean the world to me. And when you're done with that, you'll be entered for the $100 gift card. This will be to any store of your choosing. Send me a screenshot of the review to assistant@inflowplanner.com. We are going to be running this giveaway until March 11th. Thank you for your feedback. That's it for that. So today I'm speaking with a very special guest, Michelle Agudelo, who is a fertility awareness educator and menstrual educator here in the Bay Area. And we are diving into one of my very favorite topics, which is cycle syncing. If you're here for a while, you might have heard me talk about this. It's no secret that my business Inflow is rooted in the concept, and cycle syncing, for those who don't know, is really the art and science of adjusting your schedule, habits, some of your routines, even some of the things that you eat to align with where you are in your cycle. And the idea is that by making these small, actionable tweaks to our lives, we can optimize our energy and actually feel and experience more energy, more creativity, and more balance throughout our work lives, social lives, working out lives, fitness, etc., all those good things. One of the reasons why I wanted to bring Michelle on, other than she's an awesome human and I love her, is because Michelle actually implemented cycle syncing while she was still working in sales at her prior job, LinkedIn and Shopify. A lot of people who talk about cycle syncing, especially a lot of the influencers that I see online, they are speaking about adjusting your schedule from the perspective of somebody who works for themselves. And I feel like a lot of the time that can feel very unattainable for people who work in jobs that perhaps they don't own their own schedule. But I think that Michelle has provided such a powerful example of the fact that it can be done. And it can be done under the constraints of a corporate job. So sales, the quota refreshes every quarter, every month. And Michelle not only applied the principles of cycle syncing to her work life, but she saw a lot of success in doing so. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about in terms of cycle syncing, this episode is for you. And if you want just some tangible tips for how to apply this concept into your life, definitely tune in. I'm so excited to welcome this incredible woman to the podcast. And without further ado, let's jump on in. Oh my gosh. All right, Michelle, welcome to The Other Way.
Hi, Kasha. Thank you so much. I'm honored and so excited to be here today, especially since we've been talking about cycle syncing so much lately.
Oh my gosh, are you kidding? The honor is all mine. We've obviously been talking about cycle syncing a lot, but I don't think I've heard some of the details of your story. So we're definitely going to be getting into that today. But before we do, if you could please go ahead and share with the audience and me, what would be 3 words that you would use to describe yourself?
I love this question so much. And I would love to know what other people would say about
Mm.
ourselves. The word I think comes to mind as number one is positive. And that is
Mm.
because all around the world in different companies I've worked for, from different colleagues, different friend groups, the number one word that people tell me is, "You're so positive. You're the most positive person I've ever met." I think that is definitely a testament to, I guess, my personal brand, whatever that means. A second one would be a manifester, because I truly
Mm.
believe that you can do anything you want in life. If you want to run a marathon, great. There's a million other people doing that this year too. So just go for it. I truly think that you can achieve whatever you want. You can manifest whatever you want into reality. And the last one would be a student. I
Mm.
have felt this and seen this and done it time and time again in my life, to have that one, yes, beginner's mindset, but also just being a total student, which I found has allowed me to try a bunch of new things that are definitely outside of my wheelhouse and have a lot of fun, because you feel like I'm just learning here. I'm just here to understand how this works, read what I can, listen to the
Mm.
podcast or watch the videos on a certain topic or subject that I'm interested in. And it's what I think the funnest way to go about life.
I love those. And honestly, I probably would have chosen those for you, knowing what I know about you. Definitely the positive one. We need to cover cycle syncing. You're a fertility awareness and menstrual educator. You're also the founder of House of Flow. Love that. And House of Flow is a menstrual education company that works with women of all ages to educate and empower women to really reclaim the power of their cycles, to find that hormonal balance, find that sense of flow in their work, in their study life, in their personal life. But what's really interesting, and this is what you and I have bonded over, is that your background is working in the corporate world. So you were working in sales, which is a very different world. So, could you share a bit of your backstory? How did you go from tech to what it is that you're doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I worked in B2B software sales for nearly a decade before moving into women's health. 5 years ago, I was working in sales at LinkedIn and discovered cycle syncing, which is just scheduling your life and work around the phases of your menstrual cycle. There's 4 phases. And now this was 2019, pre-COVID. We're in the office on the sales floor. People are making calls, cracking jokes. Sales floor energy is typically high. And I started changing when I would make my calls, how many calls I would make in a day, and when I would do my prospecting, which is reaching out to new potential clients, what type of prospecting I would do. Would I hit the phones all day long or do more focused work and write a really clear, structured note to a high executive? There are all of these different ways that you can go about simply prospecting. I was changing when I would do my territory planning or when I would bring up important topics to my manager in our one-to-ones, when I would do my follow-ups, all sorts of things that have to do with sales. Almost immediately, I started noticing changes in my well-being, both at work, but then also at home, and how I wouldn't take stress from work home with me anymore. And over time, I kept doing this and I got to understand the expected, patterns of my cycle and understand when my energy and mood would fluctuate. And that's when I really started to see both my productivity and results at work ramp up, which was obviously incredible, especially when you are in a revenue driving role. And so I did this at LinkedIn for 3 years across multiple roles of increasing seniority. And then I moved over to Shopify, which is an e commerce company. And I kept cycle syncing, I kept reaping the benefits. And I didn't tell anyone because we don't talk about our menstrual cycles at work. And I certainly was not about to talk about my menstrual cycle to my male manager. So in hindsight, I'm wishing I had told everyone around me, but times were different then. But fortunately, I think we are in a position now where with COVID, we understand there are different ways and styles of working, and we're more open to adaptability instead of just sticking up with the status quo because that's the way we've always done things. So, anyways, I was in Australia at this time, like I mentioned previously. And right before moving back to the United States, I learned about natural birth control or the fertility awareness method.
Mm,
And that's really when the floodgates opened because I realized I was surrounded by all of these incredible women. We had great
mm,
jobs, we're well educated, we had traveled the world, and we didn't know the first thing about our body or how our cycles work or how our hormones impact everything we do and how we show up and why that matters or that we even can enjoy our periods. And I just realized if we don't know this, like we have access to so much education, so many resources. We're employed by really supportive companies who offer great benefits. If we don't know this and we don't even know how to talk about it, how many billions of people are completely unaware of our menstrual cycles? And so I've really taken the past 2-ish years or so to be a student, go down the rabbit hole, learn everything I could about menstrual cycles. And I've come to the conclusion that while there are about 1.8 billion monthly people who menstruate, a good 99% of us have no idea how they work or what a healthy period is even supposed to feel like, or that we can see our cycles as a powerful part of who we are. And I want to change that.
Oh my gosh, so huge. That is so powerful. And I so resonate with a lot of what, first of all, I resonate with what you are sharing in terms of just that lack of education. I
Mhm.
remember when I learned that there are really only 4 days out of the month typically that women can get pregnant. This just completely shocked me. We've just been taught our entire lives that, like, you see a man, you might get pregnant, right? That's the attitude we've been conditioned to experience. But realizing that, and even starting to, of course, like with the work I'm doing with Inflow, starting to learn even more about our cycles and about the concept of cycle syncing and how adjusting the way we work or the way we socialize, how that can have an impact on how we feel, but also our results in terms of
Mhm.
productivity. I so resonate with just the lack of knowledge that is there and what a game changer it can be to start to become introduced to some of that information. I'm curious, before we go any further to talk about what we should really be looking at from a cycle syncing point of view, could you give everyone a high level overview of what cycle syncing really is?
Yes. So the easiest way to orient ourselves around these definitions and what cycle syncing is, we have to go back and quickly learn our what is even happening in our cycle and what are these 4 phases we're talking about. The way I like to describe cycle syncing is likening it to the 4 seasons of yourself and how you show up, which is akin to the 4 phases of your cycle. Now, I wish that I could take credit for this, but I absolutely cannot. The person who initially came up with the 4 seasons analogy is Maisie Hill in her book Period Power. And the 4 seasons essentially is a super easy way to understand the 4 phases of your menstrual cycle, right? So if you think of the seasons in nature, winter, spring, summer, fall, or depending who you talk to, maybe there's 5 seasons: winter, spring, summer, late summer, and fall. are akin to the different phases we go through in our cycle. So, starting off with number one is the menstrual phase or menstruation. And this is the popular one. Everybody knows it. We know what's happening when you're menstruating, you are bleeding. Even if you don't have a menstrual cycle, you still understand and know what this is. And this is similar to your body's inner winter when we talk about the seasons. And this is the start of your cycle, just like the start of the year in the northern hemisphere. In nature, everything's quiet, we're bundled up, all the animals are inside their caves and their dens, right? We're resting from the year that was or the, cycle that was. And in your body, physically and hormonally, this is the most quiet time in your ovaries, right? There's not much ovarian activity. Our hormones are at their lowest. And you actually might feel a bit fatigued if you try to go, go, go and push too much, mind over matter, and get things done during the season because your body physiologically is, I'm resting and I actually need this rest so that I can emerge better in the following season and throughout the remainder of the cycle. So, a quick note on this because a lot of people don't actually know when your cycle starts. The first day of your cycle is the first day you have to take action. So, it's not the first day you're spotting, but it's the first day that you actually have a full bleed and need to take action. Use a pad, tampon, cup, disc, whatever your period product of choice is. And that's a really important distinction so that we can differentiate between the end of the cycle, our fall, and the start of the cycle, our menstruation or our winter. And then next we have our inner spring, right? This is just like in nature, things are starting to sprout up from the ground again. Flowers are blooming. There's a bit of optimism in the air. Physically in your body, you might feel yourself have a little bit more energy. Creativity comes real easy to you at this time. And so it's a fabulous time for brainstorming sessions. Maybe you're a bit more outgoing and want to come out of your cocoon from the couch when you're menstruating and actually meet up with friends and whatnot again. And this is called the follicular phase of our cycle. And it's called that because the follicular development is happening in our ovaries, right? Everything was quiet and still in winter, and now things are starting to dance again and grow and develop. So that leads us into summer, which if you don't have any pain around ovulation, this can quite easily be your favorite season. Maisie Hill in her book calls this your Beyonce season, which I so agree with, right? Because your confidence is high, your energy is coming out, you communicate super well. There's also been some studies where we know you feel a bit more sexually aroused, but also opposite sex might be a bit more attracted to you at this time. If you need to do something at work, like a big presentation or a pitch, this is your time to stand up in front of the board and deliver and own the meeting and the outcome of whatever it is that you're trying to get buy-in from, because you will own the room naturally, right? It's really cool thinking about your day to day. This is the time when you can wake up early, do that HIIT workout, have 3 back to back to back meetings and own all of them, like I said, go to a networking event in the evening and feel energized. Whereas if you try to do that exact same schedule in your winter or when you're menstruating, just think for yourself. What do? You're hitting snooze on the alarm clock because the last thing you want to do is get out of bed that morning. You're hoping that somebody reschedules a call today. You're going to bail on your friends for dinner. Hey, sorry guys, can't make it. Haha, because all you want to do is sit on your couch and watch a movie. And so it's a cool way to think about how you can use cycle syncing as a way to never have to cancel plans again. Because if you know what you're going to be feeling like in a certain phase, then you can start to schedule your life and work around it. So that leads us then into our final phase, your inner autumn, which is for the menstrual or ovulation cycle, also called your luteal phase. And our lovely luteal, she gets a bad rap because this is, if you do PMS, normally when that will come out. But is a caveat here because, as I mentioned before, there is a split between that late summer and a true autumn. So, late summer after ovulation, you might still be riding some of the high from that communication, right? But as you start to move into your true autumn, when there's a changing of the leaves on the trees, just for example, you might start to notice that communication going from, hey, pitching, presenting, XYZ, to being a bit more focused and calm, which is excellent for a negotiation. Or if you were really finding yourself having all of this energy to do a hit workout, for example, you might still be keen to get up and going, but you might find yourself wanting to change your workouts to something a bit more powerful and stronger, but not as much high intensity or cardio, for example. You can also notice the way we do in real life, like we're doing right now. We're coming to the end of the year. We're starting to tick things off, figure out what are our goals for the next year. You'll find this in your own self as well. It's a lot easier for you to just sit down and tick things off of your to-do list. And you'll actually want to be in tick, 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 tick mode and check things off because your body is physically starting to prepare itself to hibernate again as you go into your inner winter. Again, like a really easy way to think about this is that if you ever have those days when you were just like buzzing with energy and you're like, I have this one proposal, I'm sticking with work because that's how we started the call, but you have this one proposal at work that you need to get done, and that's your number one priority today. So you sit down at your desk to focus on it, but you still keep getting up to talk to your colleagues, or if you're at home to pet the dog and you have 10 tabs open in your Chrome and you have 10 tabs open in your browser and you want to get this one task done, but it's just taking you forever. But by the end of the day, 9 to 5, 8 hours later, you completed the proposal. Great. Well, in a cycle syncing sense, you could say, hey, that proposal that I have to do, I know come Friday, I'm going to be a bit more in my luteal phase. So I'm just going to knock it out on Friday morning in 1 hour because I'll naturally have the focus. You physically won't have much antsy energy where you can't sit still. And you'll actually say, hey, no, I actually can and want to sit still. And I have the clarity of thought to just get this done. And you will. And you can trust yourself and know it's okay to postpone getting this task done to when it will only take me 1 hour to do, as opposed to when it would take me 8 hours to do the exact same task. And I think that's a really cool way for companies and leaders to acknowledge the importance of talking about menstrual cycles at work. Because at the end of the day, if we're driving for the same outcome or result or whatever it is, don't we want to be the most efficient in doing it? And don't we want to cause as little stress as possible and as high well being as possible? So that's essentially why I completely overhauled and changed my career because I thought, why doesn't everybody know this? And why isn't everyone doing this?
There is absolutely so much there. First of all, love the idea that we are not stagnant. I think that is such a huge shift. And you and I have talked about this quite a bit, which is that the female hormonal cycle just operates so differently than the male hormonal cycle. Where, and I know we've talked about this offline, but like men tend to cycle every 24 hours. Women have this like seasonal like shift. And
Mm.
it just absolutely boggles me when we look at how the workplace is structured. It is really optimized for that every day is the same kind of attitude. And I just love, and this is why I really wanted to bring you on, of course, for all of your wisdom. But I remember feeling so floored when I heard you share that you cycle synced and practice cycle syncing in a work context in a corporate world, which I think is so important because I think it's so much in a way easier to practice cycle syncing when you work independently or
Mhm.
are a freelancer or you own your own company than when you are part of a team in a corporate environment with deadlines. And you did it successfully for a couple of years at LinkedIn and then at another tech company in a really deadline driven world, right? Like in sales, you have quotas every single month. So you need to hit those. I'm curious, what was that journey like for you to actually start to make some of these shifts? Because I imagine that it must have been scary at first to move your meetings around or to take that leap to trust your body versus just leaning into what everyone was expecting of you.
So, two things there. One, how I got started, and then two, how it evolved. I got started in the most basic way, and it's what I still do today. I just started noticing and keeping track of my menstrual cycle in my Outlook calendar. at work and just had a recurring calendar invite for winter, spring, summer, fall, and I had read for winter and I put it on private because I didn't want other people to be like, "What does Michelle have in her calendar all these seasons? What a weirdo." And I had winter as red, so it was really obvious if I'm booking calls to be like, "Not that day." And then spring, summer, and fall, I think I had like green, blue, and purple for autumn. And I say that just because it was an easy visual way to see where I would be in my cycle. And I did one season per week because that's at the time how I thought it worked. I thought our cycles were these perfectly structured
to 5, 7 days a week. They're just perfect like that, right?
never on the weekend or on holidays. I just started putting it in my calendar and I noticed immediately the biggest one was that first winter or menstruation that I didn't have a single call booked in. I was like, "Holla freaking hallelujah. This is amazing. I don't have to be on today and force myself to talk all day long and try to present things and be curious and do, a discovery call, which is effectively the initial calls that you would have with a prospect. I can just reflect and review on the week or account planning that was, or the quarter that was, or what I have coming up instead, and do a lot of solo work that is massively important in our corporate world, right? Like, how often do we actually take the time to reflect and refine what we're doing when we're in the middle of doing something? Normally, and I've sat in through enough sales trainings, normally we're like, at the end of the quarter, start fresh. And I'm like, hello, we have 3 times a quarter to start fresh, you guys, like majority of us. And especially since there's been such a push for women to be in the workplace, there are a lot of teams that are made up now of 50% women or 50% female leadership. Don't you want to know how to work with your cycle? Like, isn't it our responsibility to know? But sorry, that is my little tangent. Going back to your question though of how I did this. So I just started taking note in my calendar and I started realizing that what made the biggest impact was in my late luteal. So those few days before my next menstruation would begin is when I had the lowest energy and when I really didn't want to do calls, right? And again, because we don't talk about this too much, we're not that educated about our cycles. I didn't understand at the time that our hormones plummet right before menstruation begins. And I started noticing that since I was keeping track every day. And I was able to adjust my schedule accordingly and say, hey, actually, I work better when I don't do calls like the last 2 days of my cycle and that very first day of my bleed. So about 3 days, which is very different from a whole entire week of my calendar marked out for my winter. Instead, it's actually only 3 days. And it's not that I can't do calls on these days, because obviously you could not be listening to this podcast and just keep living your life and doing what you always do. But since we have this information and we can act on it, and I can choose to not book an important call when I know I'm just physiologically not going to shine in front of a client, but why don't I do all those other tasks that are just as important on these days? And I noticed too in my summer or follicular in my spring, which is follicular, and summer, which is your ovulatory phase, I would make up for those days that I wasn't on the phones and have like 4 calls back to back to back to back, all of them. And they would be either a sales qualified lead, going back to the sales references, or have like really great tangible next steps and be able to secure buy-in from decision makers. And I would feel energized from doing all 4 of those calls and then have a call with a colleague or a peer to coach them on something, because I would have all of this extra energy to expense and I could use it at that time. Now, an important note is that I didn't tell anyone. Nobody knew I was doing this. And in a high visibility role where if anybody has a manager who loves a dashboard to see what are your daily or weekly activities like or what's happening, you might notice that there's always that 1 or 2 people who are on your team that kind of just beat to their own drum, and they're like, they might not always have the same numbers at the same time or do everything when they're supposed to, but it's okay because we know that they will execute when it matters. And It was fun because as I noticed my productivity and results going up, as especially at LinkedIn at the time when I initially started cycle syncing, my manager stopped bugging me about, like, "Hey, Michelle, do you have your 3 leads for the day? Or do you have your 15 leads for the week?" And instead, he was like, "Hey, by now I know that come the end of the quarter, we know that you'll hit your number. And even if you have a slow couple days, I know and I trust that you'll make up for it in the next few days. I don't know why, but that's just how you work, and that's great." And I was like, "Yeah, this is great. Hello, cycle syncing." So it's totally okay if you feel like, "I don't know how to talk about this at work," or "My team won't go for this." You don't have to tell anyone. I totally think we should, and we have tips on why you should and how to do it. I think the biggest thing is to just start and see how your body feels in each phase and how you can alter your specific tasks and whatever your role is accordingly and make it work for you, because that's the biggest thing about all of this, is having that sane amount of like awareness and, dare I say, like menstrual mindfulness about your own body and what it needs.
So huge. I think you hit on what I think tends to be one of the biggest concerns that people have with practicing cycle syncing, which is the question of, will my productivity go down? A lot of us don't work in environments that just focus and optimize for a single day. Right?
Mhm.
We work in environments that are, for a lot of us who work like a lot of these corporate office jobs, there's this notion of building on something, right? Hitting your sales numbers at the end of the month or at the end of the week, and being able to make these slight tweaks and adjustments to honor your body and put your body in the driver's seat can make not just an impact on your immediate well being and your health, but also on your productivity in those other more optimal times of month. And I love that you mentioned the fact that you were capitalizing on your increased energy when you had it, instead of trying to deplete and pull out the energy that wasn't there. And I'll just tangent for a minute, but you know that I studied Chinese medicine. I went to grad school after Microsoft. And one of the things that just really struck me about that theory is this notion of the fact that Chinese medicine talks about qi, which is like life force in our bodies. And I used to think that I could burn the candle at both ends and just overdo it. And it was like mind over matter. But the reality is that you're taking away from something else. Like it may be you're taking away from hormonal balance by over depleting yourself. You're taking away from maybe a couple of years at the end of your life by over depleting yourself, or a harder menopause down the line, or a harder pregnancy. And so I think it is so important, and I so appreciate you bringing up the fact that because you adjust your schedule over the course of the month doesn't mean that you will overall be less productive. That is so huge.
So that we can perform when the time comes. This is just a super easy way to live it both in your professional life, but also in your personal life. So I love that you brought in the Chinese medicine aspect of it, because whether you feel more Eastern or Western or woo or productive, like whatever it is, it speaks to everyone, because it's no secret half of the world's population has a menstrual cycle. And if we should be so lucky to reach our older years, we will also go through menopause. So having that understanding is massively important.
So powerful. And by the way, I'm going to link this in the show notes, but I encourage everyone to Google this if you're listening and not driving. But there's this amazing, I think it was Washington Post article that came out referencing multiple research articles covering how our brain changes over the course of our cycle. Like we're actually able to measure some of these changes in our brains. So I know I was referencing Chinese medicine, but going back to just like traditional Western medicine and the way we think about research, these changes are actually measurable. And I think that is just so huge. Okay, I want to bring up another question that I know a lot of listeners must be thinking. There are probably about maybe 30% of women. I think that was the stat that I saw. Maybe you have a different stat. 30% of women are on some sort of like birth control. And so I would love for you to speak to that, because I think that there are a lot of misconceptions around what happens in your body when it comes to birth control. But really, I'm thinking from the context of cycle syncing. If I'm on birth control, can I cycle sync? And furthermore, does it depend what kind of birth control that I'm on?
Yeah. So, first part to answer the question, if you are on birth control, can you cycle sync? Even if you don't have your period anymore, you can still cycle sync if you're in your postmenopausal years. And the reason why is because it's an excellent way to have that structured approach to energy and rest, like we were just talking about, and believe it's the number one way to prevent overwhelm, ultimately leading to burnout, and acknowledging that we're not machines. We are humans and we need to allow this time to take a pause, but then also allow the time to allow creativity and brainstorming to happen, to allow the time for execution to then happen on everything that we brainstorm and in our previous phase and reflected upon in our winter phase, right? And then we can execute on it in summer and then come autumn and we can refine and focus. And it doesn't matter where in the world you live or what your profession is or what your relationship status is. Just the fact that we're humans in it's so helpful to have some form of structure in our lives around how we approach whatever it is that we are working on or want to be working on so that we can make steady, incremental, but impactful movements towards our X, towards our goal, towards our vision, towards our dream life, towards our whatever, right? So, an important component of this is that if you are on hormonal birth control, you likely will not, and I say likely in air quotes, you will not feel the natural fluctuations of your energy and your mood throughout your cycle simply because it doesn't happen when you are on hormonal birth control. But that doesn't mean that you can't just use whichever form you're on as a guide. So if you have the pill pack, for example, they come in 4 weeks. You can have the very first day of your pack be your springtime, right? The second week will be your summer. The third week will be your luteal. And then the last week is when you have your placebo pills. And also, usually, when you have the pill bleed or otherwise known as the withdrawal bleed. And so that would be your winter or your menstruation. So you won't feel these high highs and low lows, and, or not that we feel low, but high highs and rest as you normally would when you were cycling naturally. But that doesn't mean that you can't take full advantage. And that's an important distinction because some people might never be on hormonal birth control. Some people might be on it and then come off it and then go on it again or go onto a different one, such as the IUD, like you mentioned, or the patch, or whatever it is. And so having some way to understand, hey, maybe I'll start on this day, whether it's with an actual bleed because I see blood coming out of me, or if I do not have a period at all, then I can just choose a random day and use it as a guidepost to allow myself to have the rest and exertion as and when I need, but with that huge asterisk that on hormonal birth control, you're not actually experiencing a true menstruation or ovulation. And so you're also not experiencing the true fluctuations that come from those 4 phases in your hormonal cycle.
I think there's something so powerful about that because if we go back to what we were talking about earlier on the call, but our work days are so structured. We operate like machines. Our work days come from what, like the Industrial Revolution, right? And it's just 9 to 5, 5 days a week. Every day is the same. There's this notion that is the way that we should operate. But as we've already talked about, women's bodies are different. We very much mirror the seasons of the earth, which is just so beautiful. I absolutely love that as somebody who absolutely loves nature, loves Mother Earth. I love that. That just even the symbolism there is so beautiful. And there's something so special about being able to bring that into how we think about productivity. And this is coming from like a type A high achiever here. I think that there's something that almost like feels grounding and helps root you down into rethinking the expectation that we should just push out the same amount every single day. Not every day needs to be the same kind of hustle. I think that just brings so much more meaning to our lives.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And like a key example that I'm sure a lot of people can resonate with is exercising or your workout schedule, right? And so, please, everyone, for the love of your hormones, if we can try to stop forcing ourselves to do these HIIT or F45 or Orange Theory classes in our late luteal or menstrual phase. It's not a question of mind over matter. And I could do all these push ups last week, and why do I feel so weak? I suck. I'm so bad. It's not that. It has nothing to do with your strength or who you are as a person or your willpower, but more so about acknowledging what environment does body need to perform at its best based upon the season it's in. And the funny thing is that we know we're like big, bad, independent women. We're ambitious. We have big goals and dreams and expectations for life. And our body is still doing its number one job, which is to look after you and make sure that you survive. And just a quick example on that, if we're pushing ourselves and exerting too much energy from a workout perspective, during the times of our cycle when our body is literally craving rest and rejuvenation, right? Progesterone is the star of the show, and that is a really cool hormone that we like. Helps us sleep better, helps us look after our heart and brain and bone health, helps maintain everything that we had been building up earlier in our cycle. Progesterone is excellent. It cannot coexist at the same time as our other stress hormone, which we all know, which is cortisol, right? And so our body, even though mentally we're like, gosh, if only I could just push out 10 more push ups or do whatever this high intensity workout is, our body will say, hey, either right now I can have safety or I can have stress. And if I feel any sort of stress on my body, I'm going to go into flight or fight mode and surge cortisol, which is that stress hormone, which is the opposite of what we want. We want to feel good. We want progesterone to be able to shine here, but it literally cannot coexist at the same time that cortisol is flooding through our body. So it's a really powerful way to say, hey, you actually have control about how you feel. And if you experience PMS and all of the energy that you are forcing to execute versus what can feel a bit more effortless and enjoyable, like going for a walk or doing a yin yoga class or gasp, having a proper rest day when taking a break, as opposed to forcing your workout schedule to be at the expense of some random gym's 60-day ab challenge, right? So I think that's just a really nice example for anyone, no matter where in the world you are, to understand you can cycle sync outside of work and more in like your personal life. That's been really powerful. I've been doing it for years and I feel great all cycle long. So I think it works.
I feel like 2025 is going to start to be the reclamation of the connection that we have to our bodies, because I think that is just so powerful, even putting our bodies in the driver's seat as opposed to just listening to the specific diet or the specific workout routine that we've been told to do. There's just a little bit of, we spend so much time looking at screens, myself included, and I think this is just a little bit of a jolt towards some agency back into the body. And I love what you said about the fact that our bodies are trying to take care of us. Like, that is just such a powerful reframe. And honoring that is just one of the things that we can do to be supportive to our bodies and therefore our experiences and what our cycles will look like and whether our hormones are balanced or not. There's just so much there. Michelle, I could chat with you for hours, but we are actually coming up on time. But we haven't covered like a whole bunch of aspects. I focused it mostly on work because I think that one's so huge and I think that's so hard for people. But I feel like I'm going to link some resources for people to your website, of course, to some stuff on cycle syncing if people want to go deeper. But I would love for folks to get to know where they can find you. If you could just share, what do you have coming up? Where can people find you? That would be amazing.
I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. It's Michelle Agudelo, House of Flow. I'll be there. I also have my website, calm, and hopefully we can start to see a bit more in person and virtual events happening next year. So more to come on that with you, lovely Kasha. Trying to put this work out into the world through different workshops and community events. So stay tuned. I'm super excited to see what 2025 has in store for the cycle syncing world and the menstrual education world itself.
I'm so excited. That is such a good teaser for what we're going to be working on in 2025. So, we'll put some more information in the show notes and definitely stay tuned. And Michelle, this was such a joy. For anyone watching, they've now experienced the sunset. It's quite beautiful behind me, but now it's like the dark room. So, you know what? Actually, that, not to be too meta here, but that is like a cycle in and of itself. It's like fading into the darkness. Oh, I love it.
I love it. This is the true other way.
Thank you so much for tuning into The Other Way. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review. It really helps the podcast grow, and I'm ever so grateful. If you want to stay connected, you can find information on how in our show notes. And finally, if you're curious about inflow and want free resources around cyclical living or moon cycles, check out inflowplanner.com. And of course, for all my listeners, you can use the code podcast10 for 10% off any purchase. All right, that's all for today. See you next time.